Hello everyone, welcome back to EcoNiti. I'm Komal. This is our second video in the RBI Phase II series. In the first video, we talked about the broad plan, the 35-day plan that I gave you that you can follow and how you are going to switch from the Phase 1 mode to Phase 2 mode. Now, in the second video and in the third video, we are going to discuss the past year questions. So this is not going to be exactly a discussion of the past year questions in terms of me telling you कि कोई कॉन्सेप्ट क्या है या किसी कॉन्सेप्ट को समझाना या किसी आंसर किसी चीज का एग्जैक्टली पूरा आंसर बताना, वो इसका पर्पस नहीं होगा। इसका पर्पस होगा कि हम एक ब्रॉड आंसर फ्रेमवर्क समझ लें और हम ये समझ लें कि examiner whoever has set the paper, the people at RBI, what they are expecting from a particular question. So I'm calling it PYQ discussion, but I will give you a more concrete idea of what we are going to do. Since this is no time to go over the concepts और शुरू से किसी चीज को समझा जाए तो वो हम करेंगे भी नहीं, लेकिन हम आंसर्स कैसे लिखने हैं वो समझ लेंगे. So we are in the last week of June, and that leaves us with 25 days for the exam. So once you have this, once you see this video at this time, you will have a good idea how to curate your answer writing skills, curate your preparation, so that improvement के तरफ हम जो exact exam का demand है उसके तरफ जाएंगे. ठीक है? So let's get started. What I'm going to do is so what I've done is कि मैंने पिछले 5 साल के क्वेश्चन पेपर्स आरबीआई के निकाले हैं. सारे क्वेश्चन पेपर्स हम नहीं डिस्कस करेंगे, दैट विल टेक अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम, बट वी विल डिस्कस द लास्ट 2 years. इसका भी एक रीजन है कि उसके पहले के क्वेश्चंस और उसके पैटर्न और क्वेश्चन का जो पैटर्न था, जो पेपर का पैटर्न था, वो डिफरेंट था. फिर वो अभी रिसेंटली 2024 में चेंज हुआ है, तो हम 2025 और 2024 के क्वेश्चंस डिस्कस करेंगे. आई विल ऑल्सो शो यू द अदर क्वेश्चन सो दैट यू हैव एन आइडिया कि कैसे चीजें इवॉल्व हुई हैं. How the questions have now become more about, a very deep understanding of the concept and how that concept actually relates to the real world policy. ठीक है, तो उस तरीके से हम करेंगे. आज के वीडियो में वी विल ओनली डू पेपर वन माइक्रो एंड मैक्रो. देन इन द नेक्स्ट वीडियो वी आर गोइंग टू डू पेपर 2. So I'm going to divide it like this so that one video doesn't become too heavy and too overwhelming. So we are going to tackle paper 1 today. All right, so let's get started. I'll just share my screen. All right, so here are the questions. You can see them on your screen. पहले मैंने ऊपर पेपर के बारे में डिटेल डाला हुआ है. सो वी नो सो फार, ऑफ कोर्स इफ यू आर प्रिपेयरिंग यू ऑलरेडी नो दिस कि आरबीआई में देयर आर 2 पेपर्स, बट दिस इज आल्सो फॉर, सिंस दिस इज going to be on our YouTube channel, so this information will be relevant for future people seeing it in the future as well. So they're going to be going to be 2 papers. I'm sorry. Yeah, so there are going to be 2 papers. Paper 1 में होता है micro and macro, we all know, and paper 2 has quant and Indian economy. Every paper is for 2 hours 120 minutes. ठीक है, and दोनों के बीच में 30 मिनट का ब्रेक रहता है. हर पेपर में 2 मॉड्यूल्स होते हैं. पेपर 1 इज गोइंग टू बी योर माइक्रो एंड मैक्रो. पेपर 2 का भी 2 मॉड्यूल क्वांट एंड इंडियन, बट इक्वल. उन दोनों का जितना भी मार्क्स है वो इक्वल अलॉटमेंट होता है. हर मॉड्यूल में यू हैव 4 क्वेश्चंस. दैट मीन्स यू हैव 8 क्वेश्चंस इन टोटल, and each question carries 20 marks, right? So that means that you have to attempt 5 questions in total. You have to attend at least 2 from each section. So you have to choose 2 from micro, 2 from macro, and in paper 2, 2 from quant and 2 from Indian eco. Or 5th question is your choice. You can attempt a 3rd question from either section. ठीक है, पेज लिमिट नहीं होता है इसमें कि जैसे हमारा आईईएस में होता है या यूपीएससी में होता है दैट अ 15 मार्कर गेट्स 3 pages or something like that. इसमें वो नहीं होता. यू कैन ऑल्सो टेक एक्स्ट्रा शीट्स. टाइम लिमिट इज द ओनली लिमिट, पेज लिमिट नहीं है, राइट? एंड another thing that we know is ये सारे मेमोरी बेस्ड हैं, ये कोई एक्चुअल क्वेश्चन पेपर से नहीं है. सो दीज आर ऑल द पास्ट कैंडिडेट्स हु आर काइंड इनफ टू write these memory based questions. So official questions of course will be different, but जो questions at least 2025 के हैं, they are quite detailed. They give you almost exactly the sense के question में क्या पूछा गया था, so they are very nice. 2024 is a little less. Beyond that, it's only single statements, things like that. So it becomes difficult to even get to know कि उस question में क्या पूछा गया था. But once you have the conceptual idea, you can think about के आंसर स्ट्रक्चर कैसे करना है. ठीक है. So before I start, let me again tell you that what this session will be about. We know that this cannot be a session where I teach you any concept, right? We are past that stage. This session is going to be, suppose this is the first question, जो हमारा price effect का question है, substitution and income effect. So I'm going to assume that you know कि price effect क्या है, substitution effect क्या है, income effect क्या है. I also assume that you know कि Slutsky decomposition किस चीज को कहते हैं. You also know कि Slutsky और Hickshian methods में फर्क क्या है, right? So I assume that you are basically one second, yeah. So I assume that you are basically aware of the concepts. This is not going to be a session where I teach you concepts, but this is going to be a session where I tell you कि कोई भी आंसर को structure कैसे करना है. ठीक है? That is what we are going to do. Okay, so let's get started. Now, RBI पेपर हो या IES हो या ऑप्शनल, इन सारे पेपर्स में और किसी भी कॉलेज एग्जाम में ये फर्क होता है कि दिस इज वेयर यू आर अप्लाइंग फॉर अ वेरी स्पेसिफिक जॉब, राइट? दे आर टेस्टिंग यू वेदर और नॉट यू आर सुटेबल फॉर अ जॉब. कॉलेज में दे जस्ट टेस्टिंग योर नॉलेज, दे टेस्टिंग कि भाई तुम्हें ये चीज आती है कि नहीं आती है. तो कॉलेज एग्जाम में या स्कूल के एग्जाम में जब तुम आंसर्स लिखते हो, that answer is, you're asked something, suppose you're asked what is price effect and you write that this is the price effect, right? You're asked that Hickshian और उसमें फर्क क्या है, you write that Hickshian is where you keep utility constant and this is where you keep income constant, right? You keep the original bundle constant. That's it. That is all that matters in a college exam. But in an exam where you are applying for a particular job, it is important to understand that what is expected of you. It is important to understand कि जो भी पेपर सेट कर रहे हैं वो आपसे क्या एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे हैं. What are they trying to see when they evaluate your answers? Are they trying to see that whether you know these two effects, whether you know the difference? Of course you know. Unless तुम्हारी तैयारी बहुत खराब है या तुम इकोनॉमिक्स के बच्चे नहीं हो या तुमने बिल्कुल ही पढ़ाई नहीं की है, तुम्हें पता है ये डिफरेंस क्या है, राइट? तुम्हें पता है कि मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी का इंडिया में क्या टारगेट रहता है, राइट? तुम्हें पता है कि हिस्ट्री से लेकर अभी तक क्या नाम है, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी का एवोल्यूशन कैसे हुआ है, राइट? बट द थिंग दैट विल डिफरेंशिएट यू फ्रॉम एनी अदर कैंडिडेट इज दैट यू गेट इनटू द माइंडसेट ऑफ द एग्जामिनर. दैट इफ यू आर द एग्जामिनर फॉर एग्जाम्पल और तुम्हें कहा जाए कि भाई मेरे लिए आरबीआई के डीपीआर डिपार्टमेंट के लिए 10 कैंडिडेट्स चुनो, तुम उस बच्चे में क्या देखना चाहोगे, तुम उस कैंडिडेट में क्या देखना चाहोगे? क्या देखना चाहोगे? यू विल नॉट ओनली वांट द कैंडिडेट टू बी वेरी साउंड conceptually, right? But you will expect that the candidate is able to express herself very well. क्यों भाई? क्योंकि तुम्हारा जॉब ही वही होने वाला है ना. तुम्हारे पास 1000 तरीके का इंफॉर्मेशन होगा, तुम्हें उसको कोएलेस करना है, तुम्हें उसको असेस करना है, राइट? यू हैव टू फाइंड, यू हैव टू analyze it so that you are able to find common threads, so that you are able to see a pattern, so that you are able to see beyond the data and talk about कि ये डेटा में हो क्या रहा है. Similarly, they expect you to be able to showcase this ability in your answers, right? So you will see that the way questions have been set, a good answer, what they expect you to give is that you are able to ड्रॉ अ थ्रेड अक्रॉस ऑल पार्ट्स ऑफ एन आंसर. यू विल यूजुअली सी, अभी मैं जैसे अभी हम डिस्कस करेंगे कि जो भी क्वेश्चन के 2-3 पार्ट्स है ना, वो तुमसे एक थीम आइडेंटिफिकेशन की एक्सपेक्टेशन कर रहे हैं. Even though they may look like that they are different questions that related to the same topic, but वो different है ना, पार्ट में है, but वो सारा पार्ट एक होल का पार्ट है. And your job is to be able to express, first of all identify that thread, and then be able to express it in good words कि भाई ये मेरा आइडेंटिफिकेशन है, ये मेरा अंडरस्टैंडिंग है इस पूरे टॉपिक का, which goes beyond just the question that has been asked. All right. So let us try and think along those lines while we are looking at the questions. Okay? All right. So when I'm talking about the first question, what I'll do is I'll start with micro. 2025 और 2024 का micro करेंगे, फिर हम macro पे move करेंगे. ठीक है ना? Let's start with the first question. Explain the decomposition. Explain the decomposition of the price effect into substitution and income effects. Right? ये मतलब क्वेश्चन का फ्रेमिंग ऑफ कोर्स इससे थोड़ा अलग रहा होगा, बट ओवरऑल ऐसा था. One part is asking you that differentiate between the Hickshian and Slutsky method of decomposition. Second is asking you compare how the income and substitution effects interact for normal, inferior and given goods, right? And इनका effect on the shape of the demand curve. अभी हमको सबको इसका आंसर पता है, ठीक है? तो हम ये बस ये कोशिश करते हैं कि इसको स्ट्रक्चर कैसे करेंगे, राइट? सो आई टोल्ड यू अबाउट दैट डीमैक framework. You start with the definition, then you go to the model, right? Then you do some analysis and then you conclude, right? So mota, we will try to give a very full-fledged picture of this answer. So when you start with the introduction, of course you are going to define कि भाई price effect होता क्या है, ठीक है? So you are going to define. So I'm going a bit slower in the first question. उसके बाद हम थोड़ा सा speed में चलेंगे. So you're going to first of all define that what is the price effect. Basically, the effect of a change in price upon the demand, the optimal demand for a good. ठीक है? उसके बाद price effect ये होता है. Price effect का decomposition का क्या मतलब है? Right? So this is the price effect. Now the decomposition essentially means it is a hypothetical exercise. Correct? Decomposition is not something that is real. That is not how actual rational consumers are thinking. They're not thinking in those two stages that, okay, first let me look at the substitution effect and then let me do the income effect. No. वो हम economists ऐसे सोचते हैं. So it is a hypothetical exercise where the total movement due to a change in price is decomposed into a movement that is purely out of substitution, which means because of the change in relative price of the goods, and the change in income because of that price change in the real income, effective income that comes out of that price change. Okay, this is your definition. ये तुम्हारा intro में चला गया. अब the next part asks you, the next part asks you Hickshian or Slutsky method. So then you are going to state that basically there are two ways in which decomposition is usually done, right? And in both the ways, the difference is in the substitution effect, and the difference arises from the fact that when we say that we hold the real income constant for substitution effect, what do we mean by real income? That is the difference ना. तो हम सिर्फ ये नहीं बोल रहे हैं कि हम सीधे यहाँ पे नहीं जंप कर जा रहे हैं कि Hickshian is where we keep the utility constant and this is where we keep the original bundle constant in Slutsky. नहीं, हम उसके ज्यादा डेप्थ में हम उन दोनों के बीच का जो कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिफरेंस है उसकी बात कर रहे हैं. So a price decomposition, the decomposition in a price effect, whichever way you want to put it, can be done in two ways. And these two ways differ in what it means or what the an analyst is willing to assume the holding real income fixed means. Right? दोनों में यही फर्क है. Holding fixed the real income. One way to define real income is that you are on the same utility. And one way to define is that you are able to afford the same bundle. और यही फर्क है. If you are compensating the individual such that the individual has the same utility, you are doing a Hickshian compensation. If you are compensating such that they have the same, they are able to afford the same bundle, then you are doing a Slutsky composition. और दोनों चीजें करने के बाद आप दोनों का डायग्राम बनाएंगे, है ना. एक में सेम यूटिलिटी भी मूव करेंगे. यू नो दीज थिंग्स. यू नो कि भाई डायग्राम बनाएगा इधर, इधर डायग्राम बनेगा. एक में सेम यूटिलिटी, एक में सेम बंडल. एंड देन यू show that, okay, from here to here is your substitution, here to here is your income, right? In both the cases. Remember, indifference curves को cross मत कराना, right? This shows the examiner that you understand तुमने सिर्फ रटनी मार लिया है कि दोनों क्या है. तुम्हें पता है कि ये दोनों तरीके हैं और ये दोनों it's not like there is a competition. It is just that there are different interpretations of what we are holding constant when we just want to look at the substitution effect. All right. This is your second part. Part में करना क्या है तुम्हें पता ही है. Compare how income and substitution effects interact for normal, inferior, and given goods. Now from here ये वाला Hickshian और Slutsky का difference खत्म हो जाता है. Now they are just asking you कि इन दोनों में फर्क क्या है. So then all you have to say over here is that income effect, or like when we say that it is a negative effect, or when we say that substitution effect is negative, essentially we mean that it is negative. The movement is negative with respect to the price change, right? So if the price is going in this direction and substitution effect की वजह से the demand is going down, this is a negative effect. अगर income effect की वजह से भी demand is going down, then this is also negative. If they reinforce, we have the case of normal goods, right? If this is always going to be negative, right, you can mention that the substitution effect is always negative, can be shown via the reveal preference argument, can be shown via the indifference curve argument, right? So whichever way it can be shown that substitution effect is always negative. If the relative price of something goes up, the demand is going to go down. But income effect is what decides whether a good in net will be normal, will be inferior, or will be given, है ना. So ये तो हमको बेसिक सबको पता है. If this effect, yeah, so if this effect is greater, then we get inferior. If this effect is greater, we get given. And so then you say that given goods are a subset of inferior goods only when the income effect is strong enough to overpower the negative price, negative substitution effect, do we get given goods. Which means that these are goods, or this is a special class of goods, or goods that are very rare in the real world, but the consumer is so poor that if the price of something goes up, the income effect is so much because of that good is such a big part of the consumption bundle of the individual that the income effect overpowers the substitution effect, and rising price leaves you with no option but to consume more of that good. Right? It doesn't let you substitute away from that good because that good is heavy in your consumption basket and you're too poor to increase your consumption of something else. Right? So you can think of an example and give it over there. All right. This is what your answer 1 is going to look like. And then this, of course, यहाँ पे third part में you can translate it into the shape. So ultimately the shape is going to depend on के इसका overall sign क्या है, right? So if this is negative, slope is negative. If this is positive, the slope is positive. And so I'm assuming, just went a little more in detail into this question, but I'm assuming that these are the things that you already know. But what you have to showcase is कि तुम्हें ना एक हर part का individual understanding तो है, but तुम उससे ना you can zoom yourself out a bit and you are able to look at it from a helicopter view कि अच्छा यहाँ पे ये सारी चीजें चल रही हैं. ठीक है? Okay. Now we can go a little faster. We have understood what we are trying to do over here. Let us move to question 2. Question 2 is, in the study of welfare economics and collective decision making, Kenneth Arrow, Ronald Coase, and Amartya Sen. Sorry, I'll just read the question first. In the study of welfare economics and collective decision making, the works of Kenneth Arrow, Ronald Coase, and Amartya Sen have reshaped how we understand the balance between market efficiency and social justice. ठीक है? Analyze these statements through 3 lenses. तो उन्होंने तीनों के बारे में एक एक करके पूछा है. Explain how Arrow's impossibility theorem challenges the existence of consistent social welfare function. Second part, discuss Coase theorem and its perspective on achieving efficiency through property rights and the role of transaction costs. And thirdly, you come to Amartya Sen's capability approach, how it is a critique of traditional welfareism and its focus on equity. ठीक है? Now, when you look at it individually, ये जो 3 parts हैं, ये 3 अलग parts हैं. पहले पार्ट में एरोस थ्योरम के बारे में बात करनी है, दूसरे में कोस का थ्योरम के बारे में बात करनी है, तीसरे में सेंस का अप्रोच के बारे में बात करनी है. बट अ गुड आंसर इज वेयर यू आर एबल टू जूम आउट, टेक अ हेलीकॉप्टर व्यू एंड टॉक अबाउट कि ये तीनों जो भी ये थ्योरीज हैं, इनका कनेक्टिंग थ्रेड क्या है. राइट? सो थिंक अबाउट इट. All of them are theories of welfare, theories of social welfare function, theories talking about the role of state, and theories also trying to talk about distribution and equity. है ना? ये तीनों का इन्हीं लाइंस पे they are related with each other. So then you can think that the key framing has to be that they are talking about related things along the same lines. So Arrow is talking about कि क्या individual जो utilities हैं, individual जो preferences हैं, if we assume that everyone is rational, then can we aggregate their preferences into something that is also rational in the way that we have defined traditionally? Right? So can we aggregate these preferences rationally? Which means that is there a way of decision making such that the tenets or the actions that make a good utility function or make a good preference ordering at the individual level, the same axioms are also able to be applied at the social level. So then we can talk about real efficiency. Yeah? कि भाई सब लोग यहाँ पे एफिशिएंट हैं और सब लोग यहाँ पर रैशनल हैं और हमने उनको कंबाइन करके वी गॉट अ सोशल वेलफेयर फंक्शन, वी वर एबल टू कंबाइन देम इन अ वे दैट इज ऑल्सो रैशनल यूजिंग द एक्शंस दैट वी डिफाइंड. एंड एरो छोड़ के भाई ये नहीं हो सकता. तुम कोशिश करो कि सबके सब मिलके किसी चीज में जो है अपनी अपनी ओपिनियन दे, एक डेमोक्रेटिक प्रोसेस हो. ही शोड वेरियस एग्जांपल्स, है ना? ही शोड के भाई वोटिंग पैटर्न ये हो, वोटिंग पैटर्न वो हो, कुछ भी काम नहीं कर रहा है. If you have those 5 axioms that you want to satisfy, you have to live with a dictatorship because collective decision making does not work. कोई ना कोई हमारा desirable axiom is going to be violated. Right? So his was a finding that showed that when you try too much democratization of any decision making process, you are going to run into a collective decision making that is not, efficient in the way we want it to be. Right? What was Coase saying? Coase कह रहे थे कि भाई हम जो है, मतलब कोस का बेसिकली क्या था? कोस वाज टॉकिंग अबाउट दैट under certain circumstances, right, under clearly defined property rights and zero transaction costs or very low transaction costs, we do not need the state to be efficient. Right? So he was saying that if you are, the only role of the state has to be to define clear property rights, and uske baad private bargaining will get you to an efficient outcome. Now, so he was talking about, again, he was talking about efficiency, from a slightly different lens, right? Again, efficiency from the point of view कि कोई भी dead weight loss ना हो society में, yeah? But talking about the role of state in there. So he said that if we have these two conditions met, state is not required. But the twist is that he was essentially saying that given that these conditions are never true, and especially given that the bargaining is never costless, or it's hardly costless, it usually has big costs, state is going to be required. So then if these conditions are satisfied तो भाई state की जरूरत नहीं है, but the real reality of the world is कि state की जरूरत है, because the real world does not have those assumptions satisfied, right? That was your cause, huh? And finally Amartya Sen. So when you have talked about these two, then you have essentially established that both of them were concerned with the definition of efficiency and the definition of welfare the way we have in neoclassical tradition, है ना, यूटिलिटी बेस्ड. सेन को इसी बात से दिक्कत थी, है ना. तो जब तुम इन दोनों का कॉन्टेक्स्ट बता के फिर सेन की बात करोगे, देन यू आर सेइंग दैट सेन इन फैक्ट क्वेश्चनड द वेरी बेसिस ऑफ यूजिंग यूटिलिटी to measure welfare. So he said that it is a very narrow definition. Plus, right, again you will give that example कि भाई जब it depends if someone is very poor, someone is very in a very bad state, either physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, then even a small thing makes the person very happy. So if you're just looking at utility, ना, then you will always end up giving very small ऐसा डोज दे दोगे तुम उन लोगों को जिनके पास कुछ भी नहीं है, and you will say that their utility increased a lot, and you are giving that the same weight as a person who has a lot of money, और तुम उसको कितने भी, उसको फर्क ही नहीं पड़ रहा उन पैसों से, है ना, उनको उसको मटेरियल पोजेशन से फर्क ही नहीं है. Then this basis of comparison and of aggregation is something that he said was very narrow in scope. And then he talked about capabilities, that what matters actually is your capability as an individual in a society, right? Your freedoms, your opportunities, your equity, कि तुम्हारा quality of life कैसा है. Then you talk about these things. So what you're trying to do is कि ये तीनों जो भी बात कर रहे हैं तुम उन कोशिश करो, you're able to show that they are talking about different aspects, right, of the same issue, जो कि इकोनॉमिस्ट आंसर करना चाह रहे हैं कि भाई हम सोशल वेलफेयर की बात कर रहे हैं. व्हाट इज सोशल वेलफेयर, राइट? तो एरो स्टार्टेड एट कि भाई पहले हम सोशल वेलफेयर फंक्शन तो डिफाइन करते हैं, बट उनको दिखा कि भाई अगर ये डिफाइन करने में अगर हमको इकोनॉमिक्स वाला नियो क्लासिकल ट्रेडिशन वाला एफिशिएंसी चाहिए, हमको वो सारे वेल बिहेव्ड सोशल वेलफेयर फंक्शन चाहिए, दिक्कत आएगी, डेमोक्रेटिक प्रोसेस से ना हो पाएगा. ऑफ कोर्स यू कैन ऑल्सो, you have to say over there also that this was of course heavily criticized, especially Buchanan ने criticize किया था कि your assumptions are too restrictive, especially your IIA is too restrictive, and once you relax that you'll find that things are fine. Plus, if you're saying that democracy is not going to create a well-behaved social welfare function, that is actually a good thing, क्योंकि हमको डेमोक्रेसी में मेजोरिटेरियनिज्म नहीं चाहिए, है ना. तो we have to see that democracy is also able to protect the rights of the minorities, and whatever you are calling the shortcoming of a democracy in not being able to generate a well-behaved social welfare function is actually a merit in the favor of democracy. ठीक है. When you talk about sen, also talk about criticism कि भाई yes, very good, and you will also say कि भाई इसको ही यूज करके this is a core principle driving the HDI, लेकिन इस चीजों को मेजर करना और अक्रॉस इंडिविजुअल्स कंपेयर करना भी बहुत मुश्किल है. फिर भी the strive has to be in that direction. All right, this is going to be the structure. You begin with the definition, you draw a common thread, then you talk about each, alongside you also give the criticisms of each, and finally you conclude. Okay, all right, let us move to the next question. Analyze the dynamics of production theory, explain fixed and variable factors, and how they define the short run and long run horizons. Discuss law of various proportions and its three stages in the short run production. Then you have to discuss the law of returns to scale and the factors that lead to increasing, constant and decreasing. अब फिर से ये लग रहा होगा ये क्वेश्चन देख के कि भाई ये तो अलग अलग पूछा गया है, तीन चीजें पूछी गई हैं, एक शॉर्ट रन में वेरिएबल प्रोपोर्शन होता है, लॉन्ग रन में ये होता है, ठीक है ना। लेकिन फिर से हमको इसमें से कॉमन थ्रेड तो निकालना है। तो कॉमन थ्रेड क्या है? कॉमन थ्रेड ये है कि दिस इज सॉर्ट ऑफ अ continuous horizon, right? And how in that horizon you are able to vary your input slash scale. Huh? So when you are able to vary only one input, you are in the short run. And if you vary only one input, you cannot change the scale of production. Then you move into the long run. Long run में आप दोनों inputs को vary कर सकते हैं. And that means you can vary the scale of production. Right? So the time horizon, it's like a continuum across the time horizon. And what or how many inputs can you vary? Are there some inputs that are constrained? Then you're in the short run. And then we are talking about the law of variable proportions. Is there nothing that is constrained? तुम अपने हिसाब से किसी भी इनपुट को बढ़ा सकते हो, घटा सकते हो. Then we are talking about scaling up, scaling down, keeping the scale same. We are in the long-term horizon. So your introduction has to recognize this fact कि भाई ये दोनों अलग अलग चीजें डेफिनेशन नहीं है, अलग अलग है लेकिन वो कनेक्टेड हैं. They are connected by which time frame we are talking about. All right. So that is your first part. That is, you know, that is your first part. Explain the fixed and variable factors, how they define short run and long run horizons, right? Secondly, and of course, after you do that, you will define कि भाई ये fixed और variable factors क्या होते हैं, और so just to be clear, when you start this, तो ये तीनों चीजों के ऊपर जो intro दे सकते हो ना, this is where you will talk. This is where you will talk about that. This is how the production process is defined across the time horizon. Short run में हम इस वाली चीज के लिए एक्सप्लेन करेंगे. फिर we will go to the long run, discuss the law of variable proportions and the three stages in the short run production, right? So long run नहीं short run. तब you will talk about that there is basically you have a point where your capital or whatever is your fixed input वो underutilized है. You have a variable input. That means that your marginal product is positive and increasing. है ना? So your total product, so your this is ऐसा बनाते हैं ना production function, है ना? So this is the range where your marginal product or is going to be positive as well as increasing. This is where it is going to be positive but concave shape. और इसके बाद हम ऐसे आ जाते हैं, which means your MP curve is going to go into negative. तो ये तीन zones हैं. यहाँ पे your fixed input is underutilized. That is why your returns are going to be positive. This is where marginal product is falling, है ना? So your MPL is going to be falling over here. और यहाँ पर MPL नेगेटिव हो जाएगा. तो ये तीन चीजें हैं, इसका रीजन एक्सप्लेन कर देना कि क्यों होता है ये, ना? उसके बाद हम लॉन्ग रन वाले में जाएंगे. Then we come here, examine the law of returns to scale, factors leading to increasing constant. Similarly, returns to scale तुम्हें पता है. If you have increasing returns to scale, right? So then you are talking about the economies of scale. So you have increased and your output is in. So if you have doubled something, तो तुम्हारा output more than double हो रहा है. इसका मतलब कि कुछ specialization हो रहा है ना? Or you have whatever is the reason, your change in output is increasing more than proportionately by the scale that you have, by the amount that you have scaled up, right? Then you reach a zone where your economies and diseconomies of scale balance each other, right? And that is your constant returns to scale. And finally, एक point पे तुम्हारा plant size इतना बड़ा हो चुका है या तुम्हारा unit or scale of operation is so big that now you have diseconomies of scale because you have, say, the managerial failure. right? Or there's a communication breakdown, whatever reasons that you have studied for any plant size or any firm getting into decreasing returns to scale, right? This is what you'll say. So the common theme running through this is that they want to see your understanding of the allowed change in inputs and how that works over what is short run, what is long. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now let's move to the next question. Evaluate the long run. I think so. ये और ये question ना same ही है, because I maybe two people have talked about it in terms of the memory based question that they've given. So there's only a difference in wording. Ye same ही question. So what you will see is a long run dynamics of production. Explain the concept of returns to scale. Distinguish it from short run law of variable proportions. फिर से वही बात है. 3 stages of returns to scale and economies, diseconomies. So the first one was framed better, so I picked that. These are essentially the same questions. All right. Now let us move to the Ricardian framework of economic distribution and trade. ठीक है, ये थोड़ा सा ट्रिकी है क्योंकि डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन और ट्रेड दो चीजें हैं. ठीक है, हम फिर भी कोशिश करेंगे कि हम एक कॉमन थ्रेड इसमें से ढूंढ लें. लेट्स फर्स्ट रीड द क्वेश्चन. Evaluate the Ricardian framework of economic distribution and trade. First part, explain the Ricardian theory of wage distribution and the role of the wage fund in determining market wages, right? Describe the iron law of wages and its long-run implications for the working class. And finally, analyze the theory of international trade based on the principle of comparative advantage. ठीक है. So, Ricardo जो थे अपने टाइम में, so he was a classical economist, not neoclassical, he was a classical economist, and built on the Malthusian principle. So he talked about two things. He talked about the distribution of income within an economy or within a country, within the borders, and trade. ठीक है. तो इसके बारे में जब तुम इंट्रो लिखोगे, अगेन डोंट जंप इनटू द फर्स्ट पार्ट और वो लिखने लग जाओ. एक इंट्रो लिखो, एक ऐसा इंट्रो लिखो जिसमें यू टॉक अबाउट रिकार्डो एंड यू टॉक अबाउट in general that these are the themes across which he was talking about. So he was talking about the themes of income distribution or the distribution of the national income within the factors of production, among the factor of production within a country. And he also talked about that how countries trade with each other. And this was a response to the mercantilist view of beggar thy neighbor and bullionism. So इस तरीके से you will give an introduction about Ricardo, about the context and the time in which he was talking, and then you jump into the question, right? So you have to mention that he was a classical economist. Classical बोलना होगा, उसके बाद हमें context mention करना होगा, right? We have to mention that Malthusian population principle was what influenced him, right? This is where the iron law of wages is basically deriving itself, है ना? So ये 3-4 बातें रिकार्डो के बारे में बोलनी है and what he was working on. So he was working on distribution of national income among the factors of production, right? And basis of trade among nations, right? Then you get to discussing each of the parts. पहली चीज, explain the Ricardian theory of wage distribution and the role of wage fund. So wage fund क्या था? रिकार्डो को यही लगता था, मतलब of course उनको लगता नहीं था ये, it was a simplifying assumption, but something that was that simplifying assumption was very crucial to the results of his theory. तो एक होता है simplifying assumption जो कि अगर उसको रिलैक्स भी कर दें तो मॉडल थोड़ा कॉम्प्लिकेट होता है, लेकिन मॉडल के रिजल्ट्स चेंज नहीं होते हैं, राइट? This was not that. This was a cornerstone assumption of his model. And again, ये क्योंकि classical economists थे, so he believed in the labor theory of value. Right? So classical or neoclassical में एक one of the differences is that classical is on the labor theory of value कि किसी भी commodity का जो value है, that is basically the labor that has gone into it, that is embodied into it, the labor hours, the work hours. This is also Marxian. Marx का भी यही था. Marxian or Marx was also working on labor theory, but he also incorporated exploitation into this capitalist system, and then he went on his own discussion and analysis and conclusion, because of labor also generating a surplus value, right? Ricardo was also classical economist, labor theory of value. तो किसी भी चीज का जो value है, that is coming from the labor hours that has gone into it, है ना? So neoclassical, talking about from the point of view of the demand side. ये वाले लोग supply side वाले. All right. So labor theory of value के basis पे, so what Ricardo was saying is, जो first part था, रोल ऑफ वेज फंड. सो वेज फंड क्या था? बेसिकली वेज फंड था कि जितने भी पिछले साल का प्रोडक्शन हुआ है, बिकॉज अगेन दीज गाइज वर टॉकिंग इन रियल टर्म्स, फॉर ऑल क्लासिकल इकोनॉमिस्ट्स मनी was basically only a medium of exchange, right? उसके अलावा उसका कोई रोल नहीं था. तो दे ऑलवेज लाइक टू टॉक इन रियल टर्म्स, रियल गुड्स, रियल कैपिटल. तो ये कह रहे थे कि पिछले साल जो भी प्रोडक्शन हुआ है उसका एक पार्ट द कैपिटलिस्ट कीप असाइड एंड दैट इज व्हाट बिकम्स द वेज. तो जितने वर्कर्स हैं उनमें जब वो वेज फंड डिवाइड होता है तो वो वेज रेट बन जाता है ना? सो दिस इज योर वेज फंड. एंड दिस ऑल्सो सेड कि भाई वेज फंड क्योंकि वो पास्ट के प्रोडक्शन पे फिक्स्ड है, that means that it is fixed, right? Because it is based on past production. That means it is fixed, which means that if you want to increase the wages of one party or of one group of workers, you have to ultimately take it away from another group of workers. So again, the political context is important. Us time pe, all of these theories were also used to discourage or to discredit any kind of unions, labor unions, right? This is the time when capitalism was growing, and जो भी capitalists थे उनको चाहिए था कि वो आजादी से काम कर सके. That meant exploitation of workers. Of course, the workers tried to unite themselves, and then there had to be some, intellectual discussion about it. And these were the guys who were saying that labor union का कोई पॉइंट नहीं है, बिकॉज इट इज अ जीरो सम गेम अमंग दी वर्कर्स. वेज फंड पहले से फिक्स होता है, पिछले साल कितना प्रोडक्शन हुआ है, पिछले पीरियड में कितना प्रोडक्शन हुआ, उसके बेसिस पे वेज फंड पहले डिसाइड हो जाता है. तो ठीक है, तुम अब इस फैक्ट्री के ओनर, इस फैक्ट्री के वर्कर्स अगर यूनियन बनाते हैं तो उनको मिलेगा, लेकिन दैट जस्ट मीन्स दैट out of the total pie, someone else is going to lose it, right? This was the idea of wage fund. So it is worth, when you're writing this, it is worth that you give a complete picture of the assumption of wage fund and the implication. Okay. Then the second part, describe the iron law of wages and long run implications for the working class. Now, iron law of wages based on Malthusian principle, Malthusian theory of population. ठीक है? क्या था आयरन लॉ ऑफ वेजेस? कि जो भी वेज रेट है, एक होता है मार्केट वेज रेट, है ना? सो ही डिफरेंशिएटेड बिटवीन दैट. सो यू हैव ए मार्केट वेज जो कि सप्लाई डिमांड पे बेस्ड होता है, और एक होता है सबसिस्टेंस, द नेचुरल वेज दैट इक्वल. सो नेचुरल इज कि जो भी तुम्हारे सबसिस्टेंस के लिए काफी है. नाउ इफ योर मार्केट वेज इज हायर देन योर नेचुरल रेट, मार्केट रेट हायर देन नेचुरल रेट, तो इनके हिसाब से ह्यूमंस, I'm not saying that they didn't know better, right? They didn't know better. So according to Malthus and the people who believed in his theory, was that humans are just like any other animal and the sole purpose is to reproduce, है ना? तो जैसे ही you give them resources that are more then what they need to just subsist, their population is going to rise. Population जब rise होगी तो labor supply बढ़ेगा, और जब labor supply बढ़ेगा तो market wage rate अपने आप नीचे आ जाएगी, है ना? So you had this, if your क्या नाम है, market wage rate is going to be higher than your subsistence wage, right? This implies that population goes up, labor supply goes up, and this means that market wage goes down. है ना? Yeah. I'm sorry for my very beautiful handwriting. I hope you can understand. Okay, so what is happening is, ये है आयरन लॉ कि भाई इसके अलावा चारा ही नहीं है, एंड दिस इज अ लॉन्ग रन पिक्चर, है ना? तो ऐसा तो नहीं है कि पॉपुलेशन बढ़ते ही वो बच्चे काम पे लगा दिए जाएंगे. They will come to a certain age after which they'll start working. So whenever they are in teenage, तो ये बढ़ जाएंगे जो population का supply है, and you mean that labor supply is going to increase. Similarly, if you provide them with wages that are below the amount that can subsist them, तो फिर वो मरेंगे, भूखे मरेंगे या बीमारी से मरेंगे, malnourished हो जाएंगे, लेबर सप्लाई घट जाएगा, and then you will have ये, तो ये दोनों इक्वल होने ही पड़ेंगे, which means that in the long run the market wage is going to be at the subsistence level. There can be no other way. And that is why जब तुम इस टॉपिक को अहूजा में पढ़ोगे या कहीं और पढ़ोगे, usually it is just assumed that Ricardo assumed that wages were fixed at the subsistence level, right? So he did not assume that it came out of this analysis, which was based on Malthus population theory. All right. So this is what you have to explain over here, right? And again, also critique it कि भाई ऐसा होना था तो हुआ क्यों नहीं हुआ? क्योंकि जो Malthusian assumption था वो ही fail हो गया, right? So population just did not keep on increasing. It actually started falling. Fertility rates कम होने लग गए. Population जिस assumption से बढ़ रही थी वो बढ़ना बंद हो गई. प्लस प्रोडक्टिविटी वेजेस आने लग गए. प्लस जो ये लोग कह रहे थे कि यूनियंस होने चाहिए नहीं होने चाहिए, उससे क्या फर्क है? यूनियन आ तो रहे ही थे. So then wages were also pushed up higher than the subsistence level than what was assumed. All right. Okay. This is the second part. So long run implications, you say what the implications are, but then you also talk about that why this actually did not turn out to be true, right? And you also say over here in these two that essentially this meant that any increase in wages, because of this fixed nature of the wage fund, any increase in wages would have to come from, कहाँ से आ रहा था ये? पिछले साल के प्रोडक्शन से. तो वहीं से, और जो वो बाकी बची हुई चीजें जो सेविंग्स में चली गई, वो चीजें आनी चाहिए थी कैपिटलिस्ट के पास, बट वो सेविंग्स कैपिटलिस्ट के पास जाता, बट वो गया नहीं. वो अगर तुम वर्कर का वेजेस बढ़ाओगे तो प्रॉफिट्स का पूल कम हो जाएगा, एंड बाय अजम्पशन ऑल प्रॉफिट इज री इन्वेस्टेड, राइट? विच मीन्स दैट यू हैव लेसर amount, lesser profits to reinvest, which means you have lesser scope of growth. And ultimately, basically, if you are, so that is one thing that is eating out of your profits, that will eat out of your profits अगर तुम कोशिश करते हो कि wages को subsistence level से ऊपर लेके जाया जाए, है ना? So that is an argument against. You're basically competing, or you're basically making a case against long run growth. And then the second part was that the second thing eating away at profits is the landlord's rent. है ना? So ये classicals are basically capitalist पगलू. उनको यही चाहिए कि, मतलब, there's no, I'm not saying that they were against anything. They were just saying that if you want efficient production, you have to first of all live by the fact that wages will be at the subsistence level, and then you also have to recognize कि ये जो rent जा रहा है landlords को, वो एक wasteful expenditure है, right? So this was the political environment in which all these things were spit. You are going to talk about all of it in this. Finally, you come to international trade. theory you know, comparative advantage ये है. Basic funda ये है that unlike what the mercantilists were saying and unlike what Adam Smith was also saying, you can have trade between two countries even if one country is worse or less efficient in producing both the commodities, right? Or in producing all the commodities that are being traded. Because ultimately you have to look at comparative advantage or the opportunity cost rather than the absolute advantage. Yeah, so this is in the context that you will talk, and you will place it in the context of going against the mercantilist tradition and using trade again as an engine for growth. All right. Okay. This is your 2025 ka micro. Now this is macro. Let us move to 2024. Yeah. Okay. So this is 2024 micro. Now this is a numerical. Of course, whoever has written it, उनको याद नहीं था exact numbers, but a numerical. Let's see the question. On monopolist market structure, you will have a demand function and a cost function. Find the monopolist's profit maximizing output. What would change if it set a price instead? Does a supply curve exist for a monopolist? Okay. I think the second question is also a part of this. Okay. All right, let's do the first question first, है ना? तो हमको क्या दिया हुआ है? हमको दिया हुआ है एक डिमांड फंक्शन, है ना? So whatever, I don't know what the question was, but the way to solve it is that you have a demand function and you have a cost function. अच्छा, इसके intro में क्या लिखोगे? Of course, you will talk about the monopolist. You will say that what exactly a monopolist market structure is. We'll talk about it, and then you will get into discussing this. So monopolist market structure हो चाहे कोई भी market structure हो, जो equilibrium condition होती है वो क्या होती है? MR equal to MC. Whether or not this is equal to price, equal to price is a special case only found in perfect competition, है ना? लेकिन MR equal to MC तो सब जगह होता है. So for a monopolist this is your average revenue curve. इसको क्या नाम है, differentiate करोगे, यहाँ से MR मिलेगा, यहाँ से MC मिलेगा, इसको इक्वेट कर दोगे, you will find your Q star, right? And then using your Q star, you can plug it back into the demand function and you will find the price. ये वाला part mechanical है, but make sure that you talk a bit about monopoly in the beginning before you solve it. Now the question is that finding, यहाँ पे तो सिर्फ output ही पूछना है, output ही कहा गया, so you find Q star. The next is what would change if it set a price instead? Nothing. Remember, for a monopolist, there's always this is exactly the same question. Like a perfect competition, तुमको कोई price market से दिया हुआ नहीं है. तुम जब quantity choose करते हो तो तुम price भी choose कर लेते हो. For a given demand function, you're going to have a unique price. Similarly, for a given price, you're going to have a unique quantity. है ना? So it doesn't matter what you choose. The price is not given to a monopolist by the market. The entire market demand is the demand curve for the monopolist. ये सारी बातें हमें बोलनी है. And that means that it doesn't matter whether the monopolist sets a quantity or a price. If it sets a quantity, it will get a price. If it sets that price, it is going to get the exact same quantity. Right? So there's a unique combination. Does a supply curve exist for a monopolist? No, it does not. है ना? So इसमें तुम क्या करोगे? तुम वो दो cases दिखाओगे that you can have 2Q, है ना? Two prices for the same MC and 2MC for the same P. So ये दो cases, you will draw the diagram, right? And you will also explain कि ऐसा क्यों है, और बेसिक रीजन यही है कि मोनोपोलिस्ट को कोई डिमांड कर्व गिवन नहीं होता है. जो भी कॉम्बिनेशन पी क्यू का उसको मिलता है, दैट इज बेस्ड ऑन द डिमांड कर्व. You change the demand curve, you can have a case, you have a monopolist that has an MC. You give it a different demand curve, you may land up at a different price given the same MC. राइट. सिमिलरली यू चेंज द डिमांड कर्व, और तुम्हारे अगर वो इस वाले केस में, राइट, सो इफ यू हैव एन एमसी लाइक दिस एंड you can have something like this where your MR is intersecting the, not a very good diagram, something like this. So your MR intersects your MC at 2 points. Yeah, sorry. This is fine. So your MR intersects your MC at 2 points. One is on the falling side, one is on the rising side. Right? So same demand uske liye to tumko, you can get two MCs. All right. ये भी diagram बहुत अच्छा नहीं है, but ठीक है, you get the idea, something like this. Okay. This is what you're going to explain कि for a monopolist कोई supply curve नहीं है, हर demand curve के लिए एक unique combination of P and Q है. For every demand curve, there is no schedule of P and Q. There is a unique P and Q. So there is no curve. There is no continuous schedule of the supply curve. Now, ये numerical monopoly, I think this is again a reframing. लेकिन इसमें tax का भी पूछा गया है. So what happens to price for a monopolist given constant MC and a demand function if a unit quantity tax is imposed? Same question, I think this was just another part कि तुम्हारा अगर monopolist का MC constant है, what happens if you impose a unit tax on it? We know that this will mean that quantities further restricted, prices increased. Lekin, there, no matter how flat the MC is, monopolist will have to bear a certain burden of tax. And this is basically, इस क्वेश्चन को पूछने का मतलब ये है कि तुम्हारे दिमाग में तुरंत आना चाहिए कि ये क्वेश्चन क्यों पूछा गया है. वो ये रीजन है that they want you to do a comparison with the perfectly competitive market. मोनोपोलिस्ट का सप्लाई कर्व नहीं होता है, बट in a perfectly competitive market, MC curve is the supply curve. So when MC curve is flat, your supply curve is completely elastic, right? Which means that it will, अगर इस supply curve के ऊपर तुम कोई भी टैक्स लगाते हो, your tax burden will be 0, है ना? बिकॉज यू आर सुपर इलास्टिक, जहां पर टैक्स लगाओ तुमने अपना एडजस्टमेंट कर लिया, दूसरी पार्टी सारा का सारा बर्डन उठाएगी. नॉट सो फॉर मोनोपोलिस्ट, क्योंकि मोनोपोलिस्ट के लिए एमसी सप्लाई कर्व है ही नहीं. सो नो मैटर whether you have a flat MC, the monopolist will bear the burden of the tax. You will supplement it with a diagram, but you will also explain the logic. And you will compare it with the perfect competition case. And क्यों ये मोनोपोली के ऊपर लागू नहीं होता? क्योंकि मोनोपोलिस्ट के लिए मार्जिनल कॉस्ट कर्व सप्लाई कर्व नहीं है. So the elasticity argument does not work over here. All right, you have to think beyond what is asked and from a what do you say, holistic picture. कि भाई वो ये पूछ रहे हैं तो वो चाहते हैं कि तुम्हारे दिमाग में ये आइडिया आ जाए कि ये क्यों पूछा गया है. Why does it matter कि वो क्यों बोला उन्होंने कि फ्लैट एमसी? क्योंकि फ्लैट एमसी means a very specific thing in perfectly competitive market. Does not mean in monopoly. You have to talk about it. All right. Okay. Now we get to, so what I'll do is I will talk about ability to pay and ये वाला I'll talk about it in macro, क्योंकि 2024 वाले में ये वाला question macro में है. Because after I have talked about ability to pay over there, it will become easier to discuss this question, take less time. So I'll talk about it in macro. अभी इसके बाद पहले ये कर लेते हैं. So you have given your x, ये तो सिंपल न्यूमेरिकल है, इसमें कुछ भी नहीं है. x डिमांड कर्व दिया हुआ है, you have your income and you have the change in price. So what you will first of all do, you will find the total price effect. You will, क्या है ये, x is equal to 10 plus m upon px. So you will keep your m as 120. You will keep your px as 3 and then as 2, and then you will find the x1 and x2. This will be your total price effect. Yeah? When I solved it, I found my x1 was 14, x2 was 16. हाँ, बहुत सिंपल है ये. उसके बाद तुम्हें इसको डिकम्पोज करना है. सो हियर यू डू नॉट हैव योर एक्सपेंडिचर फंक्शन, राइट? यू डू नॉट हैव योर यूटिलिटी फंक्शन. तो इसमें डायरेक्टली जो स्लट्सकी का फॉर्मूला है वही लगाना है. सो योर प्राइस इफेक्ट, substitution effect plus income effect, and income effect is what? Income effect is x1 times del x upon del m, right? ये आराम से हो जाएगा. You find your del x upon del m, which is 1 upon px, and यहाँ पे the convention is that you take the starting price, right? So and your x1 which is 14, so you will find a value of your 14. यहाँ पे 10 था क्या? I think I have m upon 10 px. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So you have 14 upon 10 into px, which is 20. Px 30. Because we are talking about the initial one. And your price effect, which is equal to 2. So you have your substitution effect. You can solve it like this, right? Right? So you can solve it for substitution effect, which should come roughly about 1.53 कुछ ऐसा आएगा, है ना? So this is your substitution effect. The leftover is your income effect. As simple as that. But when you are talking about it, तो ऐसा मत सोचना कि भाई 2025 के पेपर में हमने पहले ही डिस्कस कर लिया है कि सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट और इनकम इफेक्ट क्या होता है, तो 2024 के पेपर में हम नहीं करेंगे. हम इसको फिर से शुरू से ही करेंगे. वी विल टॉक अबाउट व्हाट प्राइस इफेक्ट इज, व्हाट सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट इज, what income effect is, right? And over here what we are keeping constant is the bundle. So we are using this Slutsky one, और फिर इसको solve करने का you will explain the तरीका. Cool. And after that you will also conclude that this is a normal good, क्योंकि दोनों इफेक्ट reinforcing है, दोनों इफेक्ट नेगेटिव डायरेक्शन में है, opposite direction में है to the price movement, and therefore this is a normal good. So do not stop at just calculation. Interpret your result. Conclude. Okay. All right. So this finishes our micro. I'll just show you that I've also put up questions from 2022 and from 2021 all the way till 2019. लेकिन यहाँ पे चीजें थोड़ी कम क्लियर हैं. ठीक है, वो जो डिविजन है वो वैसा नहीं है. The paper pattern was different. So plus because the pattern has changed, तो ये सारे क्वेश्चंस जो हैं वो थोड़े बहुत कम नंबर के भी थे, तो वो उतना यूनिफॉर्म नहीं था कि 20-20 नंबर का सारे क्वेश्चंस हो. So then I'm not discussing them. The concepts are the same. Anyways, we are not discussing concepts. So you have to, whatever question you see, think about examiner को क्या दिखना चाहिए इससे. Examiner को दिखना चाहिए तुम्हारी understanding, your ability to see beyond the question and think about a holistic picture. All right.